Hello and welcome in today's lecture. We shall be talking about River Valley civilization and environmental conditions. As you know, the River Valley civilization developed in India in the 3rd millennium BC is generally known as the Indus Valley civilization or the Harappan civilization. The environmental condition in the West and South Asian region had become conducive to growth of agriculture and the end of the Pleistocene period about 1000 years ago. Originating in West Asia, agriculture soon spread in India in different regions. One of the regions, identified as the Indus region, provided peculiar environmental conditions that supported agriculture in the floodplains of the Indus and other rivers of the region. The archaeologists have unearthed several sedimentary settlements in this region, yielding evidence of early agriculture and permanent habitation. Such settlements were the precursor of a fully developed urban civilization. It sustained the same agricultural practice that had mediated the emergence of sedimentary settlements in the region in the past, and that essentially based on the floodplains of the river as the principal area of the agricultural activity. Since seasonal inundation of the river valleys and subsequent deposits of rich alluvial soil was a principal feature supporting agriculture, we also call the Indus civilization the River Valley civilization. The antecedents: the floodplains of rivers supporting agriculture have been a typical environmental activity in the Indus region. It gave rise to habitations that sustained a mix of agricultural and nomadic practices. Some major sites of this type excavated in the region are Keli Ghul Muhammad, Rana Gundai, and Mehergarh. Mehergarh was an early food-producing village located on the banks of the Bolan River that flowed through the Kachi plain that is an extension of the Indus Valley. The Bolan River provides a major route of communication between the Indus Valley and Balochistan. It's the principal hydrological feature of the Kachi plain today, where it runs along the eastern edge of Mehergarh. The Bolan Pass is a relatively easy route to the Quetta Valley and central Balochistan. Mehergarh sits at a strategic place and is very important, special location, a hub of communication, a place where people met and mixed. The richness of material evidence from Mehergarh is perfectly in tune with situational importance. Mehergarh is a unique site as it provides evidence from nearly every phase of the Neolithic Revolution, extending roughly from 7000 BC to 3800 BC. Settlements at Mehergarh have been found spread almost in a line. The overlap is absent as the settlers moved from one place to another along the Bolan River. This movement was from north to south with 3 distinct periods of settlement. As stated by Possehl, a great deal of information on the paleobotany of Mehergarh is available. The collection from period 1 is especially rich. The dominant plant of period 1 is domesticated naked 6-row barley. Domesticated wheat is present in the form of einkorn, emmer, and free threshing hard durum, but in amounts much smaller than the barley sample. The non-cereals identified for the period include the Indian jujube and dates, represented by stones in period 1 and 2nd. It is thus evident that the beginning of Indus civilization was marked by an early existing system of agriculture at permanent settlements in the river valleys of the region. This system was sustained on the seasonal alluvial deposits brought by the floods in the rivers. The environmental conditions. An understanding of the environmental conditions in the Indus area is of importance because the region today falls in a semi-arid zone and may perhaps not sustain agriculture in the same measure in which archaeological evidence provides earlier. The study of environmental conditions in the Indus area have evoked some debate as the different climatic conditions obtained at the time of the flourishing of the Indus culture. The majority of early complex societies arose in areas where the environmental factors experienced by ancient subsistence farmers were variable but not particularly diverse. Scientists found that this region experienced climate change during the peak of the Indus civilization, that is from 2500 to 1900 BC. The civilization provides a unique opportunity to study how an ancient society coped with diverse and varied ecologies and change in environmental parameters. The Indus civilization was situated close to a deep lake, Kotla Dahar, which would have been primarily monsoon. The lake showed evidence of two dramatic decreases in monsoon rainfall and a progressive lowering of the lake level. The second of these shows Kotla Dhara becoming transient during 2200 to 2000 BC as a result of an abrupt weakening of the monsoon, which is visible in Sapeliotheum records in Oman and northeast India. Based on the work pioneered by Sir Earl Stein and the writings of V. Godonchild, says Possehl, it was once thought that all the Near East and the western parts of the South Asia had been subjected to severe post-Paleistocene desiccation. The presence of stone dams called Gabrabans and large numbers of prehistoric archaeological sites in areas now almost devoid of settled people seemed to fit such a hypothesis. This view gave rise to the belief that the arid environmental condition in the region was the consequence of an exploitative human activity that denuded the region of its natural resources, contrary to the view that severe climatic fluctuations caused the degradation. Subsequently, 3 studies focusing on the climatic conditions of Indus culture appeared between 1961 and 1971. The first, in time sequence, was a study undertaken jointly by Raikes and Dyson, Jr. They re-examined the arguments and evidence presented in support of the hypothesis of desiccation in Balochistan and concluded that aridity in the region was not a consequence of any severe climatic variation but was the result of human activity of degrading nature over a long period. In continuation, Gurdeep Singh's study is based on the pollen data gathered from Sambhar, Didwana and Lankaransar lakes in Rajasthan that are all salt lakes. He believes that climatic change occurring at about 2000 BC increased the salinity of these lakes. By implication, therefore, the same aridity affected the Indus region. Correspondingly, Ramaswamy puts forward the case for climatic variation rather directly. He says that there is adequate archaeological evidence to suggest that the Harappans who flourished in the Indus Valley between 2500 and 1700 plus or minus 1 century BC lived in climatic conditions that were much moister than the conditions that exist in the region today. Moreover, Irfan Habib asserts that the climatic shift view is inconsistent with the drainage system of Mohenjo-daro and Kalibagan, which could not have withstood any heavier rainfall than what the areas now receive. If an arid phase followed a wet phase in the present geological age, then the change must have long preceded the Indus civilization. As per the literature available, the geology of Rajasthan is very complex. The three lakes investigated are hypersaline today, but there are also freshwater lakes in this same region. The lakes are Pushkar and Ganges. This observation leads to the conclusion that under a climatic regime in Rajasthan, there can be both freshwater and hypersaline lakes. It can now be safely contended that on the whole, there has been no significant shift in the climate in the Indus area. The region has remained semi-arid since the beginning of the Indus civilization, with inadequate rainfall so as not to support agriculture without the assistance of supplementary irrigation. The floodplain agriculture of the Indus civilization was characteristic of climatic conditions and the peculiar behavior of seasonal floods in the rivers. Now let's talk about Indus agriculture. Indus agriculture was the outcome of the agriculturally productive potentialities of the region. The fact that it sustained the development of such an important civilization is in itself adequate proof of these potentialities. The number of inhabitants that this large area contained has been variously estimated, the estimating ranging from 1 to 5 million. Perhaps it is more reasonable to set it at a point somewhere midway. Given a total of about 150,000 persons assignable to Mohenjo-daro and Harappa together, the total urban population could not have been less than 250,000, bearing in mind the fact that large urban sites like Ganveriwala in Bahawalpur and Lakhmirwala in the Indian Punjab remain unexcavated. During the 19th century, when India was at its peak of deurbanization, the rural population was nearly 9 times that of the urban. With agricultural production far lower than in the 19th century, it will be difficult to believe that enough food for the urban population was grown in the Indus civilization by a rural population less than 15 times its size. How such a rise in agricultural productivity was achieved is no longer a mystery if we closely study the agricultural approach and the tools and equipment employed for the purpose. We have already ruled out the possibility that the climate was better back then than it is now. Advanced agricultural technologies and a more systematic approach appear to be more likely influencing agricultural produce. Method and tools. In a region which did not have sufficient rainfall for supporting agriculture, recourse was taken, as has been noted above, to the floodplains of the rivers that tended to deposit every year soft and fertile alluvial soil along their banks during the summer months. The agricultural pattern of the Indus civilization was thus geared accordingly, and it is useful to understand the river behavior at some length to truly appreciate this feature. The Indus has a very large and wide floodplain, and the alluvium deposit too is fairly deep. The behavior of the Indus is comparable with the two other river systems that were also the cradle of important ancient civilizations, the Nile and the Euphrates Tigris river system. A comparison of this type may help us place the Indus system in the proper perspective. A comparison of the Indus with Nile and Euphrates Tigris has been done by Shereen Ratnagar. She writes, "The Nile is, in contrast, predictable and tame. It floods its extremely narrow valley between late June and September with a fair degree of regularity, the water standing in the fields for several weeks and then subsiding, thoroughly wetting and fertilizing the soil before it is time to sow. Wheat and barley require no further irrigation, even though Egypt is a hyper-arid land with less than 10 centimeters of rainfall per year. The Indus too floods in the summer months well before the wheat and barley sowing. It is at its highest level in August. But its annual water discharge is 207 billion cubic meters as against the 63 billion cubic meters of the Nile. Its catchment in the Himalayas is several times the magnitude of the Nile or Euphrates catchment, and it carries a huge amount of water at great speed. The floodplains of Indus, as is evident, were quite expansive and the alluvial deposit sufficiently deep for supporting agriculture, mainly the rabi crop for the vast habitational settlements as that of the Indus civilization. Shireen Ratnagar is quite perceptive when she says the locations of Harappan sites are not explained by climatic conditions. In fact, rainfall, as in all arid regions of the world, is erratic. Variability in Sindh, for example, is 65%. The important evidence on agricultural tools comes from Kalibagan, Banwali, Jawaiwala and Shatughai. The sites at Banwali and Jawaiwala provided evidence relating to plough as an agricultural tool. The discovery of a plough-furrowed field at Kalibagan is of seminal significance as it proves the use of a plough and the use of an ox for drawing the plough as a draft animal. The use of a plough and an ox as draft animal for drawing the plough was fundamental advance in agriculture. Now let's take a look at crops. The Indus agriculture was mainly based on rabi crops, which were the winter crops sown after the recession of floods by September or so. Wheat and barley were two main crops for which evidence was already there in Mehergarh in the Indus Valley civilization. The other rabi crops for which evidence has come from Indus period sites were mustard, linseed, peas, lentil and gram. There is some more related information that adds to our understanding of Indus agriculture. Irfan Habib refers to interesting evidence as he says ovens including tandoors have been found at Kalibagan, taking the history of bread making in India back to nearly 5,000 years ago. Similarly, Shireen Ratnagar has deduced the use of fiber and oil extracted from cotton and sesame. She also suggests oil from linseed would have been used for lamps rather than for food. Dear students, we have discussed the main evidence about the environmental conditions and the agriculture of the Indus civilization and have also attempted to establish a correlation between them. We now give an overview of the agricultural system and the subsistence pattern of the Indus region. The Indus people were mostly farmers and herders. Barley seems to have been the principal food grain, except in the Sorath domain where the people were cattle keepers par excellence who also raised goats, sheep, water buffalo and a variety of crops. The main agricultural season in the Indus region was the Rabi or winter cropping season. The floodplains were ready for agricultural activity from September onwards and were intensely used for raising rabi crops. By 1800 BCE, the Indus Valley climate grew cooler and drier, and a tectonic event may have diverted or disrupted river systems, which were the lifelines of the Indus Valley civilization. The Harappans may have migrated towards the Ganges basin in the east, where they could have established villages and isolated farms. These small communities would not have been able to produce the same agricultural surplus to support large cities. With the reduced production of goods, there would have been a decline in trade with Egypt and Mesopotamia. By around 1700 BCE, and most of the Indus Valley civilization cities had been abandoned. That's all for today. See you in some another lecture. Till then, goodbye and good luck.